It's easy to forget that people have lived in America before Europeans. Traces of these civilizations remain, and yet we see very little of who used to live here before us. You don't see Native Americans on a daily basis, not usually. They've largely been relegated to reservations, or living in impoverished conditions. Before the arrival of European Americans, Native peoples lived for centuries on land we now designate as national parks. In Yosemite Valley, the Ahwahneechee tribe lived an abundant and self-sufficient lifestyle by caring for the surrounding lands and waters long before the arrival of European Americans. In 1848, though, everything changed. When the white men flocked into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains in search of gold, it was not long before difficulties arose with the Indians. What happened here was the same thing that had happened everywhere on the frontier. The red man had to give way to the white, but he did not do so without a struggle. The struggle, it is true, was short, since the California Indians were not capable of maintaining a long contest. The Mariposa Indian War, which lasted from 1850 to 1851, was the final blow to the Yosemite Valley natives. Captain James Savage, a California pioneer and commander of the California militia, had established trading posts on the Merced and Fresno rivers where he traded with the local tribes. In October of 1850, after he had traveled to San Francisco, he returned to find his camps raided by the same natives he had been trading with. This led to the formation of the Mariposa Battalion, with the express goal of capturing and moving the natives from their lands to a reservation in Fresno, California. A peace commission first sought a non-violent solution, and on March 19, 1851, the commissioners signed a treaty at Camp Fremont with 6 tribes. However, the Yosemite natives were absent, and the campaign against them began on the same day. Savage and his company traveled toward Yosemite Valley and overcame a small forward camp the Yosemites had left. Savage sent messengers further out the valley requesting the Yosemite chief Tenaya to speak with him. Tenaya promised that his people would come down peacefully, but after waiting for several days, no natives appeared. Savage's company marched further on and discovered a group of 72 of the Yosemite tribe and their chief Tenaya, who were traveling toward the Fresno River camp where the commissioners were signing the treaty of the 6 tribes. Savage took a guide from the tribe and continued further on to find the rest of the Yosemite tribe, and after reaching Inspiration Point, became the first non-native to discover Yosemite Valley on March 25, 1851. However, Tenaya had managed to escape during the walk, and thus the first campaign was inconclusive. The second campaign marched in May 1851 against another native tribe, the Chowchillas, and destroyed their food stores. The death of the Chowchilla chief induced the tribe to surrender to reservation status. The campaign was similar to the first, and this time Savage managed to capture the entirety of the Yosemite tribe and move them to the Fresno reservation. Reservation life was humiliating and joyless. There were no more mountains and meadows, no more abundant food and water. Tenaya begged to be returned to Yosemite and got his wish. After Tenaya had rebuilt his home to some degree, a group of gold miners ventured up the canyon and were killed by the Yosemites. This sadly spelled doom for Tenaya's tribe. After a third campaign into the Sierra wilderness on May 22nd, most of the Yosemites were captured at Lake Tenaya, and what little remained had fled with Tenaya through the mountains to the neighboring Mono tribe. After this band was fed by the Monos, they stole some of their horses and again returned to their sacred valley. Finally, the vengeful Monos overtook Tenaya in his sleep and killed him for his betrayal. Thus ends the sad story of wild Tenaya and the Yosemite tribe. In 1855, the first tourists visited Yosemite. As more visitors came to Yosemite via horseback and stagecoach, entrepreneurs saw an opportunity to provide goods and services in this remote destination. Soon, lodging and homes were built, and meadows became home to livestock and orchards. By 1864, there were residents living in Yosemite Valley all year long. Later, in 1889, John Muir, America's most famous and influential naturalist and conservationist, and Robert Underwood Johnson, editor of the Century magazine, had growing concerns about the devastating effects of sheep grazing in the high country. They launched a successful campaign to persuade Congress to set aside this area as a national park in 1890. On October 1, 1890, the U.S. Congress set aside more than 1,500 square miles of reserved forest lands, soon to be known as Yosemite National Park. When the park was established, there came regulations that effectively disallowed a traditional Native American lifestyle, namely that you are not allowed to hunt or gather on National Park Service lands. However, this was not without its own irony. The surviving members of the Ahwahneechee tribe who had lived on the valley's natural bounty now survived on tourist dollars, especially after the park grew in popularity during the last third of the 19th century. Male and female Yosemite Indians worked for hotels, served as guides, and sold berries and freshly caught fish to visitors, but they also made a living selling authentic Indian culture. They danced, sang, told fortunes, and sold baskets, all of which generated profit because of early tourists. After all is said and done, what remains of the Native Americans in Yosemite today? Only remnants of their culture, in the form of gift shops and some festivals, including one that celebrates the acorn harvest, a staple of the ancient Yosemite tribe's diet in nearby Tuolumne County. Some descendants of the Yosemite tribe still work in the park, under the direction of the National Park Service. Since the indigenous peoples of the North American continent are now a scant trace of their former numbers, there is hardly anyone left to tell their story. I confess I know little of the ways of those who originally inhabited the land I now take for granted. I always thought of national parks much like the Park Service's mission statement, to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. This seems like an audacious remark to make about lands that used to be lived on, enjoyed, and preserved by the Native Americans who used to live there. Is their history nothing but a historic object to preserve? The mission statement never specifies which generations get to enjoy the parks, but certainly they didn't mean those who originally inhabited the lands. Instead, the enjoyment is now for the greatest tourist race in the history of mankind, whites of European descent. Although this too is audacious, I believe it's closer to the mark. Now, instead of seeing majestic Half Dome in all its glory, I will think of the Yosemite tribe who could live there all year long, hunting game, drinking clear water, telling songs and stories. I believe we could have learned much from their culture, but unfortunately greed got in the way. Yosemite National Park now stands as a sepulcher for Tenaya's tribe and his predecessors, although its designation does the most justice toward the native tribe by keeping the land in a somewhat pristine condition. As the old saying goes, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The great tragedy that befell the Native Americans is one I hope we do not repeat.